Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day two, session two of SteelMint Engage 3.0, the virtual connect. Engage 3.0 is being held over 4 days from 1st till the 4th of November 2022. In these webinars, we are exploring a gamut of topics ranging from steel, iron ore, scrap, and metallics to coal, ferroalloys, non-ferrous, and relevant issues like carbon emissions, and also the scenario in Europe, especially against the backdrop of the ongoing war. We are discussing changing market dynamics in finished steel and raw materials to facilitate decision making. I'm Motamita Mukherjee, editor, Steel Mint.
Hi, I'm Nishtha Mukherjee, General Manager, Steel and Iron Ore at Steel Mint, who will be co-hosting this session, which is on Europe steel production cuts. What does it mean for the world?
I would also like to thank the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their logo support to the webinar. Europe steel production cuts. What do these mean for the world? A very relevant topic, especially against the backdrop of the current geopolitical scenario. The positive trend seen in EU's apparent steel consumption in 2021 came to an abrupt end in the second quarter of 2022 due to the ongoing disruptions linked to the Russia-Ukraine war, poor demand outlook, and severe crises in energy costs. All these downside factors are expected to weigh even more severely in the second half of 2022 and up to the second quarter of 2023. We will learn a lot more from our special guest this afternoon. He is joining in straight from Europe. Our esteemed speaker is Mr. Alessandro Sciamarelli, Director, Market Analysis and Economic Studies, Eurofir. Mr. Sciamarelli is an experienced economist who has been working for more than 15 years in internationally oriented and English-speaking environments such as research centers, international organizations, private corporate sector, and in major Brussels-based European industry federations. He has had a very strong background in economic and statistical analysis, mainly in the field of quantitative and qualitative analysis on developments in mortgage and housing markets across the EU, on EU policies, management and evaluation of development projects dealing with EU affairs, and related policies, amongst others. Welcome to the webinar, Mr. Sciamarelli.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 11 a.m. here in Brussels, in Europe. My presentation is intended, as it was already mentioned, to provide you with an overview of latest developments and the outlook for the rest of this year in 2023 for the EU steel market, which is facing unprecedented challenges in a way, combined due to the combined effect of the ongoing war in Ukraine and its disruptions and the unprecedented energy crisis that has affected Europe these days. So I will get started and I will show you my presentation. I hope you see it clearly. I am Director of Economic and Market Analysis at Eurofir, which is the European Steel Association based in Brussels. The association includes national steel associations from European member states, Germany, France, Italy, and so forth, and also major leading individual steel companies such as ArcelorMittal Europe, Tata Steel, Liberty Steel, etc. So I will get started with an overview on the latest developments in the macroeconomic picture, which has changed considerably over the last few quarters, with all major leading indicators pointing towards technical recession in GDP in Q3 and Q4 this year. We don't yet have Q3 2022 data, but our latest Q2 2022 quarterly figures still show growth in GDP, albeit at moderate rates, but growth has been slowing down continuously since the second half of 2021, when already some downside factors, namely supply chain issues at a global level and already rising inflation, have started to curb economic growth and to lower growth expectations, casting a shadow on the economic outlook. And in the course of 2022, rising inflation has led to monetary tightening, that is the rise in interest rates by the ECB and other central banks. And also, obviously, the ongoing war in Ukraine has slashed GDP growth prospects for 2022, but particularly for 2023. With that in mind, we know that the US, the other major advanced economic area, has already entered technical recession in Q2 2022, and the economic cycle in Europe is very much likely to follow. So we very much expect technical recession in Q3 and Q4 this year. So 2023 will see the European economy enter with a negative carryover for 2022. But for 2022, you see there the latest annual GDP forecast still see growth, even at quite good rates, which is an effect of the positive carryover from a previous post-COVID economic cycle. So in 2022, the European economy has shown some resilience and will achieve growth according to our latest forecast released by Eurofer, 2.9% in 2022. Mainly thanks to positive developments over the next of the first 2 quarters in the first half of this year. The European economy was very much resilient, particularly thanks to positive contribution from services, which is likely to continue, whereas the industry is likely to provide negative contribution to GDP growth. But for 2023, the picture is very much different because the continued impact of the war in Ukraine is going to lead to not to a recession, an economic recession in the whole EU or euro area, but is going to have an asymmetrical effect with mild recession in the 2 most important manufacturing economies of the EU, that is Germany and Italy. You see there, according to Oxford Economics and according to the IMF, in 2022, Germany and Italy will have a recession of a mild recession of minus 0.2% and minus 0.3%, which would be slightly more severe according to Oxford Economics for Germany, minus 0.8%. But for the euro area, the IMF still foresees very modest growth, 0.5% for the whole euro area. So the impact of the war should be relatively mild in 2023. But however, this will translate in a much more severe impact for the industry, provided that the economic growth, which was going to be modest, will be driven primarily by services, which have gone back to full speed after the post-COVID recovery. And these are 2 major leading indicators showing the evolution of confidence in the EU, in the whole EU. On the left-hand side, you see the overall economic sentiment indicator, whereby confidence has plummeted in September this year, going down to the lowest levels seen since October 2013, when the economy was in recession. And on the right-hand side, you see the Standard & Poor's Global Eurozone Composite PMI, Purchasing Manager Index, Output Index, which anticipates.
Mr. Shamarani, can I interrupt you for a minute? Your PPT is not moving, actually. We can't see it. Your PPT is not moving. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
You are not seeing the next slide?
No, we're not being able to see one slide after the other. You're stuck in the first slide.
Can you see it now? Can you see it now?
It's not moving.
Maybe you can share in
now?
the presentation mode.
Yeah, we can see it's moving now. It's moving now.
Okay, sorry for that. Thanks for signaling me.
That's right.
On the right-hand side, you see the Standard & Poor's Eurozone Composite PMI Output Index, which anticipates actual developments in real GDP. And you see there also the index has been plummeting over the last few months. You see the very big drop, the very sharp drop due to COVID in mid-2020, and then the strong post-COVID recovery in economic activity. But then the index has gone down to the lowest level seen since January 2021, when the economy was still in a COVID scenario with lockdown measures, etc. So the economic confidence is at very low level, and all these leading indicators point to a recession over the next few quarters, at least for the end of this year. The toughest point, the lowest point of economic cycle should be really Q4 this year, maybe Q1 2023, with the biggest impact on the overall economy and particularly on the industry. What is the main reason behind this negative expected performance? There are two major factors which are very much linked to each other. The first is the acceleration in inflation, which has reached record highs in Europe, levels which were unseen since 1985, as a result of the rise in energy prices in recent months, but also these inflationary developments were due to severe supply chain issues such as bottlenecks and lack of shipping and so forth, which materialized already over the second half of 2021. So you see their inflation started to rise already in the second half of 2021, reached already rather high levels, but then has gone even up to 11% in Germany in September and 10% in the euro area. The expectation for the next few months is that inflation might ease somewhat. The European Commission foresees 8.3% over the entire 2022, and the ECB, the European Central Bank, foresees 5.5% in 2023. So inflation should ease next year, but however, it will remain around very, very high levels in historical terms. If you look at here, you see that inflation was around zero and even below zero before the COVID outbreak in early 2020, and had been around zero or very, very modest levels, around 1 or 2% since 2013. And then inflation is expected to remain around these levels, very high levels, at least until the end of 2022, and then to moderate only from the first quarter of 2023. What is even more important for the industry is that energy inflation in Europe has reached equally a record high, and has even gone to 41% in September, which is another level unseen since 1985. What is behind this acceleration in inflation, which has peaked particularly over the summer since July? Well, this chart, I think, very well explains what's behind, and it is not the only factor explaining the rise in inflation. We've seen that before. Inflation started to rise already in 2021 as a result of supply chain issues, but clearly the shock in energy prices has contributed a lot. You see here a comparison between the natural gas price index, the reference price index, which is the Dutch TTF for Europe, and the corresponding, more or less, the equivalent gas price in the US. And you see that the increase in natural gas price in Europe in July and August has peaked to levels which were really unseen, were unprecedented. There has been no equivalent rise in natural gas price in the US. So gas prices in August have reached unprecedented levels that were equal to a 20-time increase compared to the levels seen in 2021. So gas prices went from 20 to 25 euros per megawatt hour to above 300 euros per megawatt hour. So then they have dropped in recent weeks. They have dropped even by 70% compared to the August peak you see there, but they remain, however, around high levels. They remain around 100 euros per megawatt hour, which is quite substantially higher than historical levels. But the increase has definitely been much more relevant than for the US, which are another comparable advanced economic area. So this is to say that the core message here is that the energy shock and the energy crisis is pretty much a European problem, because it is a fact in Europe more than any other advanced economy. And this is these are some observations, some remarks about the current energy prices crisis, which are very relevant for us and also for European policymakers. So, in a nutshell, this energy crisis is the most serious ever experienced by Europe. But however, despite its seriousness, its impact could be lower than previous energy crises. This is why, well, for various reasons. Well, first of all, because the energy intensity of the European economy is lower than it used to be, for example, in the 70s. But there are also other reasons. Europe is better protected, let's say, from the impact of energy shocks, even though the current shock is the most serious. As we see here, in 2022, we will have no economic recession. The energy crisis has already started to bite with record highs in gas prices, but we will have in 2022 no economic recession. We see that already. Inflation should be, let's say, around 8.9% in annual terms. Let's see what has happened during the two previous big energy crises in Europe that happened in the 70s. During the first oil shock in 1973, crude oil prices, which were the main energy reference price at that time, crude oil prices rose by 6 times. And the impact was much bigger in comparison because we had recession in GDP in Europe from a growth which was around 5 to 6% per year, which was much higher than today. It went down to nil or even negative. And inflation reached even 20%. So the impact was bigger. And this also happened during the second oil shock in 1979. Oil prices went to, they increased by 1.5 times. Whereas this time around, during the current energy shock, natural gas has increased by almost 20 times. And inflation in comparison should not exceed 10%. So the inflationary impact should be lower, and also the impact on the real economy should be lower, albeit considerable, and particularly for the industry, as we will see in a few slides. But the conclusion here, the main message is that the current energy shock should have lower economic impact, even in case of a worst case scenario, as we call it. That is, you know that Europe, and particularly some European economies, Germany and Italy, are very much reliant and dependent on the supply of Russian gas. Russia has threatened to completely cut its supply of gas to Europe. And so we have made some calculations. We've seen some estimates on the possible impact of this full 100% cut of gas on European economies. And the impact would be, in 2023, a drop in GDP of minus 2.5% for Germany and Italy, that are the two largest manufacturing economies in the EU. So even in the worst case scenario, the recession would not be more serious than 2.5%. But this is, for the time being, a scenario which we tend to rule out. And we believe that a scenario of a mild and asymmetrical recession is more likely. That is the scenario which we have presented in our previous slide. So we rule out a 100% cut of supply of Russian gas. But however, the impact for the industry, even in the current scenario, will be considerable. What we see here is an analysis of the steel-using sectors' growth and the evolution of year-on-year growth rates in the output of steel-using sectors in Europe over the last quarters since Q1 2017. What we report here is the evolution of the 4 main steel-consuming sectors in Europe. There are construction, mechanical engineering, automotive, and domestic appliances. And then we present the overall evolution of SWIP, which is the steel weight in industrial production. What you see here is that clearly, after the post-COVID rebound, you see here the drops in output due to the COVID recession, which had led in Europe to shutdown of factories across Europe due to restrictive measures. Then we had this post-COVID recovery, which was very strong, even stronger than expected. But then, since the second half of 2021, we've seen a slowdown in growth, which resulted even in negative territory, particularly for the automotive sector, which is the green line, which has experienced 3 consecutive quarterly drops, and then has returned to mildly positive growth in Q2 2022. Overall, what we see here is that despite the impact of the war and the disruptions on the global economic outlook and the industrial outlook, steel using sectors have shown quite some resilience in the first half of the year. But we expect for Q3 and Q4 this year negative developments and let's say technical recession in sweep and in major steel using sectors in Q3 and Q4 as a result of the prolonged impact of the war in Ukraine and the deterioration of the economic outlook. But however, thanks to positive developments in the first half and thanks to resilience of some sectors, overall sweep is still expected to grow in 2022, that is by 1.9%. But however, as I said, recession is expected to continue at least until Q1 2023, maybe even up to Q2 2023, although it is very difficult now to predict exactly because the situation remains very, very uncertain and difficult. The most resilient sector has been in these latest quarters, as it has already been for previous downturns, the construction sector, which accounts for 35% of total steel consumption in Europe. The construction sector has been primarily supported by national and EU-wide public supporting schemes that have benefited, in particular, public construction and infrastructure projects that have been used as a counter-cyclical tool to tackle the downturn in demand. Whereas the automotive sector has been hit most severely, the construction sector the automotive sector is the most exposed sectors to external shocks and to fluctuations in the economic cycle because the supply chain in the automotive sector is particularly complex. And therefore, already supply chain disruptions since the second half of 2021 started to impact the output of the automotive sector. And in addition, ongoing uncertainties about the implementation of electric vehicles are, let's say, creating uncertainty among producers and among consumers. Consumers have seen their incomes being squeezed by rising inflation, so car demand remains rather depressed. Consumers are not willing to buy new cars, which are expensive, and the implementation of electric vehicles in Europe is lagging behind compared to the US, for example. So this is the overall picture. For steel sectors here, we present briefly two other major leading indicators for industrial activity. The first chart on the left-hand side is more focused on steel using sectors, steel in particular, and reveals the evolution of orders from steel using sectors. So you see that the pattern here is very much like the what we've seen in the previous chart with the post-COVID recovery, which was very strong, was very sharp since second half of 2020, with orders going up to very, very high levels in historical terms, peaking and orders peaked in January this year as a continuation of a carryover of positive trend seen in 2021, but then obviously eased and went down to negative territory for metal goods and construction due to the increase in construction material prices in particular. But the construction sector, as you've seen here, has shown more stable developments and has been less volatile. Orders from the automotive sector have remained around rather high levels, but have gone down and are likely to decrease even more over the next few quarters as a result of the negative outlook for the automotive sector. On the right-hand side, you see very simply the evolution of overall industrial production, which is a very good proxy for the steel industry. The overall industrial production in the EU and in major industrial economies, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. What you see there still is the robustness, the strength of a post-COVID recovery in 2021. But clearly you see here the coupling, that is to say that there are two groups of countries which can be identified, whereby in the EU, in Italy and Spain, industrial production has almost fully recovered from the losses seen during the COVID period. But on the other hand, industrial production is still lagging behind in Germany and France, particularly in Germany, which is the red line. The German industry has been affected more than any other manufacturing sector in Europe, and this is due primarily to the problems that are being experienced by the automotive sector, which in Germany is very relevant, is very important for the economy, and therefore industrial production in Germany is lagging behind. This is also behind the prediction of a mild economic recession in 2023. So the industry in Germany is very much likely to be impacted severely in 2023. And to conclude this section, as an overview, this is the evolution of growth in annual terms since 2019. And what you see there clearly is that, first thing to say, SWIP, the overall steel weighted production, has been negative already in 2020 due to COVID, with a sharp drop of minus 10%, then has recovered quite strongly in 2021, and still in 2022, due to the positive developments in the first half of the year, is going to achieve growth by almost 2%, but then is expected to drop as a result of the prolonged impact of the war in Ukraine and its related disruptions in 2023. But it's worth reminding that SWIP already recorded flat developments in 2019, when already steel sectors were affected by a downturn due to trade tensions, which arose due to some measures taken by the U.S. administration at that time, U.S. Section 232 and trade tensions, which came around, which already affected, as you see there in 2019, some steel sectors, and particularly automotive and mechanical engineering and metalwork. Then COVID, the COVID pandemic outbroke, and recession was obviously much more severe in 2020. Then all sectors rebounded in 2021. But interestingly, automotive rebounded very, very modestly, only 3.3%. So automotive is very, very far from recovering from the losses seen in 2020 and in 2019. In 2022, construction is expected to be very strong and to achieve growth, as I've said, due to public support and also due to positive developments in the residential sector, in the housing sector. But in 2023 is expected to drop. This is something which is, let's say, expected as a natural end of a positive cycle, but also due to the fact that the housing market is going to be in a downturn, is expected to record negative growth in 2023, due primarily to the rise in mortgage interest rates as a result of the rise in policy rates by the ECB and other central banks. The automotive sector, on the other hand, will very modestly recover in 2023, but will be a technical rebound, a very modest technical rebound by 1.1%. And mechanical engineering will have flat growth, will not experience a recession, but will have flat growth in 2023. So this is the overall outlook, which is expected on the demand side. And then finally, we go to the section on the steel market indicators, and then we start with the supply side. This is an overview of the evolution of crude steel production, total crude steel production in the EU. So this shows the evolution of the EU as a steel supplier. And what we see here is what we call a long-term decline, in the sense that despite the strong rebound in 2021, which you see here after COVID, around rather high levels, around 153 million tons per year, steel production volumes in total have not recovered yet from the losses which were seen during the previous big recession that was in 2009, at the time of the financial crisis, when crude steel production experienced a drop of 30%. So we had a decline already in 2019, as we said, reflecting a first downturn in steel using sectors due to trade tensions, and then production plummeted in 2020 due to COVID, and then a very strong rebound in 2021. But for 2022, as a result of the continued disruptions due to the energy crisis and to the war in Ukraine, and particularly to the rise in energy crisis and to the increase in production costs, which has already led to some idle capacity and idle production, we expect crude steel production in total to drop by around 4%. So the expected impact in terms of production cuts in the whole EU for 2022 is expected to be around minus 4%. And in terms of, let's say, evolution on the demand side, that is apparent steel consumption, here we present quarterly data since Q1 2008 to better show fluctuations, let's say, around across quarters. But the pattern appears to be pretty much the same. The trend appears to be the same as production, with a very strong post-COVID recovery you see here after Q3 2020, which let's say led to rather high levels in historical terms. But however, these levels were still far below what had been seen before the big recession of 2009. So also consumption's level have never recovered since then. We have seen the recovery, so after the post-COVID rebound, but we expect negative developments in apparent steel consumption from Q3 2022, that is the start of our next forecast period, at least until Q2 2023. And we've seen already a drop in Q2 2022, which we see in the next slide. Contrary to what had been seen in previous quarters, when, despite the impact of the supply chain issues and already the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, in the first quarter of 2022, apparent consumption had achieved the year-on-year growth up to Q1 2022. So what we see here, what you see here is the evolution of growth in apparent steel consumption. That is the blue bar, the blue histogram, and then we put it next to the evolution of imports from all third countries for all crude steel products, which is the orange histogram. And the key message here is very simple. Apparent consumption in Europe started to drop already in 2019, as we've seen before, due to the impact of trade tensions and the downturn in manufacturing due to uncertainty in the overall economy due to increasing trade tensions. But then obviously the downturn had worsened and deteriorated even further, reaching a drop of minus 24% in apparent steel consumption in the second quarter of 2020 due to COVID, when factories and steel production were de facto stopped by government decree due to the pandemic. Then, since Q3 2020, there was a robust recovery with moderate growth first in Q4 2020, and then a very sharp rebound, very strong, exceptional one-off growth in Q2 2021, which was, however, entirely due to the comparison to the very low levels seen in Q2 2020. But a key message here is twofold. First, as we said, yes, in Q2 2022, apparent consumption has already recorded a drop of minus 5%. So apparent consumption was resilient up to Q1. Growth had been slowing down constantly throughout the second half of 2021 due to supply chain issues, but consumption had been resilient. Then in Q2 2022, due to the impact of the war in Ukraine, consumption has dropped year on year. And imports from all third countries have constantly outpaced in terms of growth apparent consumption over the last 4 quarters. And in Q2 2022, even in a context of market downturn, of a drop in demand, imports have continued to grow, albeit very moderately, by 1.6%. But you see there, in previous quarters, growth in imports have constantly outperformed growth in apparent consumption. In annual terms, what does it mean? In annual terms, already a drop in 2019 by 5.2%, and even more severely, obviously, due to COVID in 2020, minus 10.7%. Then we had a rebound in 2021 of 11%, but we foresee a recession in 2022 that is minus 3.5%, which is almost entirely due to negative developments, which we expect for the third and the fourth quarter of this year. So we expect drops in apparent consumption in Q3 and Q4 this year, which are expected to last until most probably Q2 2023. And as a result, also 2023 will see a drop in apparent consumption of minus 1.9%. That is that out of the last 5 years, including the 2-year forecast periods, 2022 and 2023, apparent consumption will have dropped in 4 years out of 5 over the whole period 2019-2023. That is, let's say, something which signals the extremely challenging conditions that still market operators in Europe have to play within, and multiple challenges that have risen in recent years. The trade tensions in 2019, then COVID, then supply chain issues, and then the war and the energy crisis, which is expected to last until at least the first half of 2023. So this is all going to impact apparent steel consumption considerably in 2022 due to negative developments in the second half of this year in 2023. A methodological note here, which should be clear to everybody, but I would like to recall that apparent steel consumption is defined as the overall steel demand which has not yet been corrected and adjusted by the stock cycle. Once apparent consumption is adjusted by the evolution of the stock cycle, then we call it real steel consumption. My final slide is about the impact of all these developments in consumption and imports in terms of steel trade balance. As you can see here, these are the latest annual trade balance figures available, and also we have the data for the first 6 months of 2022. So in a nutshell, steel trade balance has been negative over the last 5 years since 2017. With deficit widening further in 2021, deficit had been narrowing slightly in 2019 and 2020, but only due to weak demand. But then it has expanded considerably in 2021 and even more so in the first half of 2022. So this means that Europe is structurally becoming a net importer of finished steel products. This chart refers to finished steel products and not to all finished to all products. It does not include semis. But that's the key message. That's the overall picture for the trade balance. And then my conclusions, just to recap what I said, I will not repeat everything. Just to say that high energy prices, which we've seen despite the correction and the downturn in recent weeks, is expected to stay around rather high levels, still around 100 euros per megawatt hour, at least until Q1 2023, maybe even Q2 2023. And as a result of these very, very high energy prices and war-related disruptions, economic and industrial recessions are much more than likely, are almost certain in the EU in Q3 and Q4. And with the possible extension of this economic and industrial downturn up to Q1 and Q2 2023. But however, the overall economic impact of the energy crisis will be lower than previous energy crisis. As I've said, the worst possible impact would be minus 2.5% GDP recession in Germany and Italy. But however, the repercussions on the industry would be much more severe because, as I've said, the relative resilience, so to say, of GDP is entirely due to the positive performance of the service sector, whereas the industry will remain in a severe downturn. On the policy side, two notes which are worth mentioning. There is a discrepancy here in Europe among monetary and fiscal policies, which I will explain now. The first is that due to rising inflation and the record high inflation, monetary policy in Europe has been reversed considerably, as it was already done in the US by the Federal Reserve. So the ECB has raised its policy rates already in July and in September, and already a few days ago by another 75 basis points. So 3 policy rate hikes in the last 6 months. So the message is very clear: monetary policy will be restricted in a way. However, real interest rates remain widely negative. But the message is that the ECB will raise interest rates again, and this will not be good news for the economy, will delay investment, will create a more negative economic outlook. But on the other hand, fiscal policy remains expansionary. So there's a discrepancy between these two policy measures. Fiscal policy will remain expansionary because, Europe has some fiscal rules in terms of deficit and government debt ceilings and limits, and these limits have been completely suspended until the end of 2023. So governments will have more room to, to support the economy with supportive measures. But the macroeconomic picture is, however, going worse, and recession, even though mild recession, is expected, at least in Germany and Italy, for next year. And then the outlook, as I said, remains gloomy. Strategic sectors are expected to experience negative growth in second half of this year, due to the extended impact of the war in Ukraine and energy prices. Automotive is set to remain, as in previous crises, the most vulnerable sector, with another recession in 2022. But overall, thanks to positive developments in the first half of this year, strategic sectors as a whole will achieve growth in 2022, but a drop in 2023 is foreseen. The construction sector, as I've said, has achieved a very strong growth in 2022 thanks to a lot of public support, but is expected to enter negative territory in 2023, particularly due to the expected downturn in the housing market as a consequence of the rising mortgage interest rates. And apparent steel consumption, as I just said, is expected to decrease both in 2022 by minus 3.5% and to a lower extent in 2023 by minus 1.9%. But the overall picture, as I said, remains very, very uncertain and subject to a lot of uncertainty, and our predictions for this year and next year might be revised with our next report. Major uncertainty factors remain a possible gas rationing, even not up to 100% from Russia, and particularly the evolution of energy prices, which are expected, as I've said, to remain around rather high levels over the next few months. The very last thing, my presentation and its content very much reflects the figures and findings which are available in our quarterly market economic outlook, which is publicly available on our website, which is www.eurofair.eu, where you can find some major insight and findings reflecting what I've presented to you today. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much indeed. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alessandro. That was indeed very insightful presentation by you. You really spoke on the EU growth slowing down, the monetary tightening, inflation that you indicated may ease in next few months, and also about the gas prices that have peaked almost 20 times since 2021. However, we could understand that there are chances of possible improvement in the economic outlook from Q2 of calendar year 2023. So thank you once again for the presentation. As a gentle reminder to all the online attendees, I would request everyone to submit in their queries on the chat box. Do also mention your as well as your company's name while you put in the queries in the chat box. So till the audience questions are lined up, we'll start with the questions from our end. Mr. Alessandro, first question that I would like to ask you is that as you mentioned that EU is likely to be in the recession in Q3 and Q4, but you are ruling it out for the entire 2022. So what are the factors do you think will support this?
Thank you. As I've already mentioned earlier, the factors underlying overall positive developments in 2022 are basically the resilience of the industry of steel using sectors in the first half of this year. We might have expected already a downturn in steel using sectors output in Q1 and Q2 2022, or at least a much more severe downturn in some steel using sectors. But the industry has shown a lot of resilience, and the impact of the war and its disruptions has been more limited. But we expect in the second half of this year that impact will be felt very severely, particularly due to the rise in energy prices, which was not seen in the first 2 quarters of this year.
Madhumita ma'am, I think you're on mute. We aren't able to hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Sciamarelli. There's one question I want to ask you. What is the outlook on gas prices for the rest of 2022 and Q1 of 2023? As we saw, these had risen 20 times from your presentation, that these had risen 20 times compared to 2021, but dropped off from their August peak by 70%.
Yeah, true. The reference gas price in Europe has dropped by 70% from the peak, which was seen in August, which was exceptional. But however, despite the 70% drop, it remains around high levels. As I said, the average long-term price used to be around 20-25 euros per megawatt hour, and it is likely to remain above or around 100 euros per megawatt hour, at least until Q2 2023, which is quite high and triggers a lot of considerable increases in production costs, not only for the steel industry, but also for all industries and in energy-intensive industries in Europe. So this is a challenge. It is extremely difficult to predict with certainty how gas prices will evolve, but we might reasonably say that some stabilization in gas prices could be seen over the next few months, albeit still around rather high levels. Much will depend, I think, and that's not only my opinion, but I think a lot will depend on the ability of let's say industries and gas distributors to secure gas supply at reasonable prices before the next winter will come, because now for this winter gas stocks were replenished around 93-95%. So for this winter, more or less, Europe is safe in the sense that gas supply has been secured, but we do not know what's going to happen when gas stocks will have to be replenished around the summer of next year. It very much depends on what level gas prices will be, but this is something which we cannot predict at the moment. But obviously, it is also very much linked to the possible continuation of the war in Ukraine and geopolitical developments related to the war. So that's the outlook.
Closely linked to the rising gas prices and inflation are the European mills production cuts. Now, what is the quantum of production loss Europe will likely end 2022 with? And by when can supply start coming back, since you are expecting inflation may stabilize in the coming months?
Well, as I said, we expect, based on our latest monthly production figures, we expect a production cut, a loss in total crude steel production in Europe by around 4% for 2022. We haven't yet quantified it for 2023, but we expect that demand conditions may improve, and therefore supply conditions might improve, reflecting a better demand outlook only from Q3 2023, although it is still subject to uncertainty. But that's the outlook, more or less. Obviously, energy costs and inflation will very much impact production volumes and the ability of steel producers to produce to meet demand. One thing I can say, in general, more broadly, also, if we look at the past and at previous crises, during the post-COVID recovery, we can see that steel mills were able to ramp up production very, very efficiently to meet the increase in demand that materialized after the COVID, the post-COVID rebound. So I would assume that if demand conditions will improve in the second half of 2023, steel producers will be able to meet the increase in demand quite efficiently.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just a follow-up question. You indicated about a possible drop of 4% in crude steel production on an annual basis. Any estimation about the drop in iron ore production is what one of our attendees wants to know.
Could you repeat, please, the drop in
iron ore production?
We do not produce forecast on iron ore production. We follow developments in supply of raw materials, but we do not produce any forecast on this.
No problem.
No.
So coming on to the next question. So the European Steel Association has been lobbying with the EU policymakers for reliefs against the high energy prices. So what have the authorities' responses been to these demands? Any update that you would like to share?
Sorry, I had problems in hearing your question. Could you repeat?
Yes.
Sorry.
So the European Steel Association has been lobbying with the EU policymakers for the reliefs against the high energy prices. So what have the authorities' responses been to the demands raised?
Okay.
Any comments?
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I had lost a few words. Okay, well, the EU policy response has been, let's say, so far been quite lagged and slow compared to the urgency that we feel that all industrial sectors have called for immediate and urgent policy response and reaction at the EU level. But the legislative and policy process in the EU is very complex because the EU is an organization of member states and is not a country or a single member or a single state. So the decision-making process is complex and slow. But however, there are some policy proposals that the European Commission, which is the main responsible body, for this type of crisis and this type of measures, the European Commission has laid down on the table some policy measures which range from a possible price cap on the import of Russian gas to possible electricity use rationing and the reduction in consumption of households and industries from a reduction of 5% to a reduction of 10%. Some of these measures have been put on the table and are currently being discussed. No decision has been made yet. This has to be made at the political level by the European Council that has the power to, let's say, to make decisions at this policy level. But the European Commission can make proposals. We, as Eurofer, with other major energy-intensive industry in Europe, we have called for more aggressive, let's say, and urgent action. That is primarily we have called for a measure which would allow the EU to act as a single buyer of gas from Russia or for whatever other supplier from the rest of the world. That would enable the EU to have more negotiating power and more bargaining power in a way to, let's say, mitigate the fluctuations of the of gas prices and to be less, let's say, less exposed to the fluctuations of the of gas prices. So this is the most urgent measure that we require, which would, in our view, better protect the EU. So just really to act as a single buyer, because for the time being, we've seen a lot of national measures at the national level by individual member states in Germany or in Spain, whatever. But this is something which is not desirable because it breaks the unity of the EU as a single buyer and as a single policymaker, and it also, let's say, it creates a fragmentation of the single European market, of the single European energy market. So this is why we call for a single policy action.
Mr. Sciamarelli, since we're running a little short on time, some two quick questions. Now, we have seen some panic buying at the start of the war, and there were expectations that there would be a pre-winter restocking, but probably that has not happened. So when do we, can we expect a restocking demand to re-emerge from Europe? And secondly, what is the status of the carbon border tax adjustment? Quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, quick answers to your questions. The first, we expect restocking, let's say, maybe in Q2 2023, from Q2 2023, reflecting a possible improvement in demand outlook. We've seen some restocking in the first half of 2021, which then ended up in early 2022, reflecting worse market outlook and worse market conditions. So I would say from Q2 2023 onwards. On CBAM, well, discussions are going on in the EU. The legislative process began and now it is ongoing. As I've said, the legislative process in the EU is quite complex. In a nutshell, CBAM should enter into force in 2026. And now the European Commission is negotiating all the technical details with the governments and also with industrial associations like ours. So we will see what will be the technical details of this measure, which is likely to be very important for the industry, but it will very much depend on how the final CBAM will look like. So for the time being, we're still in the middle of the legislative process.
There's time for only one last question, and this is from an attendee. He wants to know what is the total capacity in EU for steel production, and how much of the same has been idle due to the high energy prices.
Well, nominal total steel capacity, if I remember properly, is around 210 million tons nominal capacity. This is something which can also be found in the steel capacity OECD database, I think. In terms of idled capacity, I cannot provide a precise figure, but we are in the process of collecting figures, which is something which needs to be done at a company level. So we are collecting figures from our company. But I can tell you during the COVID crisis, idle capacity, let's say, reached a peak, let's say, during the worst moments of the COVID crisis of, let's say, 15%. So I'm not able to make any prediction, but this was the biggest impact during the COVID crisis. But we have already some evidence of idle capacity due to very, very high energy costs, particularly, which are really imposing a challenge to our member companies.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sciamarelli. If our viewers have more questions, we can send them directly to him and get them answered. But as of now, we have to close this session. And
Okay.
I hope you'll enjoy the webinar to my viewers. And a very, very warm thank you to Mrs. Shamarani for your valuable time. Thank you to Nishtha for joining in. And a big thank you again to the Ministry of Steel and the Indian Steel Association for their logo support. And before we end, a reminder to join us for the next webinar on how Indian stainless steel mills are dealing with the global economic downturn. It's at 4:45 p.m.
Thank you very
so
much indeed. It was my
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you again for your invitation. It was my pleasure.
It was
Thank
a
you all.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.